Hello. Today we heard from President Trump that there's been a US India deal, or thaw in the US India relations. Now, after a year of negotiations and repeated tariff threats by President Trump, 25%, 50%, 100%, do I hear 500%, and so on. Well, some called it was a game of a spoiled child throwing a tantrum. Anyway, but after relative silence by Prime Minister Modi of India and by the Indian establishment, so we now have what seems to be a deal of sorts. Now, one might ask, what brought this about? Is that a mystery? Was it the mother of all deals announced by EU after it made a free trade agreement with India just about a week ago? In any case, President Trump announced today that Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi agreed to stop buying Russian oil. In addition, India agreed to buy much more from the United States and potentially Venezuela. President Trump posted on Truth Social on Monday that there will be about $500 billion of new trade with India. Now, he did add our amazing relationship with India will even be stronger going forward. The question one might ask is, what does the US get in return? In the deal, what's in it for the US? Well, in exchange for this deal, a good deal, India will cut its duties on US goods to zero and will commit to buy American at a higher level. Now, the trade between India and US has been hovering around $120 billion, maybe $150 billion or so, if you didn't count services. But if you did count services, it would be double that actually. But the US does not want to count services. It only talks about trade on goods because it's in its favor to talk about trade on goods. It is not in its favor to talk to the world about services because the Microsofts of the world, the Elon Musk's X of the world are all monopolies of sorts. And they do get a lot of money from all over the world. But hey, it's accounting gimmicks. You want to talk trade with goods? Fine. You don't want to talk services because it's already in your favor? Well, that's your prerogative. In any case, this agreement to buy 500 billion more from the US by India, it probably covers agriculture, coal, energy, technology, armaments, helicopters, Chinooks, Apaches, drones, and so on, among others. Well, that's agriculture in particular should make some MAGA backers happy. The farmers who backed President Trump in the last election, they should be happy. It might make them happy to some extent. So, when two large economies and the world's largest democracies work together, it benefits our people and unlocks immense opportunities for mutual beneficial cooperation. That's what Prime Minister Modi posted on X today. Now let's see what might happen in the short term. Back to the oil. Now the US wants India to buy oil from Venezuela. Well, one might ask, what was the big deal about controlling the oil from Venezuela? Now let us review some facts. US controls 1 million barrels a day of Venezuelan oil. Actually, between 800,000 to 900,000 barrels per day, with potential for a 30% increase in the near term under US-led oversight. Now, unfortunately, the ExxonMobils and the Chevrons of the world have been rather skeptical about putting a lot more money into it because they're not very sure how it's going to work out. So, there's an issue of processing the sour oil from Venezuela. Where would you do it? Now, where can that be processed? Only three places in the world have large processing facilities for the type of oil that comes out of Venezuela. India has a reliance for refineries, pretty huge. Some Caribbean refineries do exist in the Caribbean, and China, of course, is having the facilities to process the heavy sour Venezuelan crude, and it can be processed in Texas, for example, some places there, but only about 200,000 barrels a day could be processed there. Chevron can take another 100,000 barrels of Venezuelan crude into a system at Pascagoula facility, and maybe another $300,000 on a good day at El Segundo in California. But President Trump needs to dump his Venezuelan oil somewhere. And here comes India. The crude from Venezuela is going to be shipped to India now to make sure it makes some money for him. But the total procurement cost of vessels involved in the U.S. surge in the armada that's out in the Caribbean in the region has been noted to exceed $40 billion. There's a good chunk of change to get some Venezuelan oil and some presence in the region, I suspect. Now, so now we have the news. Monday's news. US India deal appears to be a direct response to the growing trend of compromise by President Trump. When he does not get what he wants, I suspect that President Trump attempts to walk a line between strong arm trade policies, cajoling, threatening, coaxing his erstwhile trade partners, and his reluctance to isolate the US economy from its biggest partners out there. Clearly, India will not ever open up its agricultural sector. 40% of its population depends upon it. It's not robust enough to be open to the world, especially to the subsidized corn and grains and pulses that come from America, for example, and so on. So it cannot afford to have 40% of its population exposed to global threats in the agricultural sector. But India just ordered, just remember, hundreds of Rafale jet fighters from France and has agreed to build Su-57 fighter jets. Maybe some call it fifth generation, at least 4.5, under Russian collaboration. Clearly, India will not buy F-35s that President Trump had demanded that they buy a while ago. Now, coming back to a big ticket item, the thousands of airplanes Indian airline sector requires. Airbus expects to deliver 1,200 aircraft to Indian carriers over the next 10 years. Now, the question is, will Boeing get some of that action? It's a likelihood some of that could happen after this deal. India wants some Apaches and drones, etc., from the USA that might get some traction now. It's been kind of slow in the last couple of years after President Trump came to power. Most importantly, corn, maybe cotton, those sectors can be imported from the USA. It'll get a big boost now. There could be some other collaboration in chip manufacturing. Maybe the low-end chips could be made in India, for example. The question is, how could you go from $150 billion trade a year to $500 billion? I mean, it's not going to happen overnight. It could take a few years, a couple of years at least. So it's a good deal, I suspect, better than nothing. And then there's a lot of things, the details missing now. But it'll be interesting to see how this evolves. But nevertheless, yet another deal made. And let's see how it progresses.